Welcome to Spinout.
I'm Dave,
And I'm Winner.
and we're here to demystify venture
Minimize FOMO.
and discuss the relationships between GPs and LPs.
And today we're going to get back to our mini-series on how to fundraise. In the last episode, we talked about the minimum viable fundraising operations, the MVFO as we called it, which is quite a mouthful, but I recommend that episode. In today's episode, we are going to talk about building an initial data room.
And just to give you a little bit of upcoming ideas, we're going to be talking about track record next week, and then we'll finish our mini series with onboarding LPs. All right, but today we're going to dive into the operations. We've already covered things like how to get started with fundraising, the legal, banking, and finance function pieces, software stack, as well as many other parts of that minimum viable fundraising operations. Today, we'll talk about data room. Winner, why don't you kind of run us through what we should be thinking about when it comes to data rooms?
Yeah, so data room with respect to fundraising, why is this important? So there's a little bit of philosophy here around data rooms to kick it off. But it's important because it's one of your first touch points with prospective LPs, right? You're disclosing what you've done and who you are and how good you are at what you've done. And it really sets the tone, I think, for future interactions, and really sets the tone for the diligence process that hopefully will ensue with many LPs. Another reason it's important is because it's a way to demonstrate how organized you are, and it's a way to stay organized. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's also a way to demonstrate kind of how you manage your back office. We talk a lot on this pod about data infrastructure and the importance of data infrastructure, especially, us at Signal Fund Services, like how we view the importance of data and how you manage that data and how you're able to report on that data is super important. And the data room is just another signal. It's another demonstration of, again, how you keep your data and how you report on your data. And again, it's an early interaction, right? You can't make a first impression a second time. And so all of this kind of rolls into a data room is a signal for how you operate. And so super, super excited to talk about data rooms today. And Dave, why don't you dive into kind of the operational pieces here of how we're thinking about data rooms?
Yeah, and operationally, I think what's really important to couple with the philosophy of what we're building in a data room, operationally, this is your practice. This is your opportunity to get ready, to find issues that are small. Some of them are very simple, easy to fix, little ankle biter issues, but some of them might be red flags to LPs, and you're able to identify these by going through the process of building out your data room, acting as if you're an LP and checking yourself. And so I think it's really important for firms, especially when they're doing their first data room, to think about it as kind of getting yourself ready and doing some self-practice and finding those issues before the LPs do. And then I think the other kind of key piece to this operationally, when you're actually thinking about selecting which tools you're going to use or how you're going to share information, you want to think about the efficient way an LP will want to go through this information, right? Because it is part of their diligence, it's part of their sales process, and do you want to remove friction? So as you're gathering all this information, you also want to think operationally, how am I going to create an efficient process, an efficient mechanism to make it easy for my LPs to go through this information?
I love that point, Dave, on kind of the thinking about it from the GP perspective, right? What have I done? Right. It's almost like exercise before the game. And you want to make sure you're ready for the game. So, building that data room early on and making sure you have that, who am I? Why am I so great? The GP perspective in there, but you also want the LP lens, right? Again, like that workflow of how the LP is going to interact with your data room, how they're going to find information, what information are they going to find? Super, super important. So I think we want to keep it simple as well. There's, different views on data room. We don't want you to, again, build this monster behemoth from day one. I think the good news is data room can be simplified, but it needs to be effective, right? So simple doesn't mean non-effective. Simple means you've captured the essence of what's important for you and what's important for LPs. So our view at Signal is that, there are multiple versions of a data room. The first version, like let's call it, Fund Zero, you're just starting out, is a very simple data room that just has a couple of documents, and you can share this widely. As you go through your fundraising process, we believe there's probably one or two more versions of the data room. The second one would be like that first version is becoming more robust, right? You're collecting more information, you're getting feedback in the fundraising process, you're adding more documents, and It's just becoming more robust. And again, like you're creating that with, a wide array of individual prospects. The third version is kind of still in that, initial fundraising process, which contains a lot more, I think, robust information on companies and performance and data that's a little bit more sensitive, but demonstrates that, you're working with some of the best companies on earth, you're working with some of the best people on earth. And so we do believe that, you can have different versions of your data room, one that's more for prospecting and one that's more for LPs that are digging, really deeply into your fund opportunity.
As a new GP, you're building out your first data room. The first thing you're building is relatively high level. It's meant to be shared with a wide audience. And as you move back through these different kind of parts or iterations of the data room, the information is getting more specific, more confidential in nature, more proprietary. And you're also expecting LPs to kind of show interest and progress through your sales pipeline to access those different parts of the data room.
Yeah, thinking about this again as three parts of the process. So your initial data room, right? The data room that you add additional information as you move through the fundraising process. And then this robust data room, right? That you especially need to have at Fund 2 and Fund 3 and beyond, as you move to becoming institutional. That first iteration can be as simple as a pitch deck. We'd also recommend you include, your track record, but I think those are kind of the two things that are most important is the LP really understanding, who you are, your narrative, like what this fund is about. Why does this fund need to exist in the market? And, why are you the team or the person that's enabling this fund? And then also, what have you done to support your track record with respect to that fund? Like those are the two most important things to kind of think through. And that can be it. And again, you're operating inside the context of the financial services industry. So this is effectively an advertisement. So you want to make sure your data is very buttoned up and accurate, but this is the prospecting version of your data room. Now, again, as you move through that data room, you might start adding stuff like your pitch deck could change. You might add to your track record. You're going to include case studies. You might add a DDQ. You're going to add in legals. So it's almost like the second data room, the second version of the data room that we're alluding to is really just you as you move through this fundraising process, which can take 1 or 2 years in this fundraising environment. You're adding in materials to make the case stronger, right? You're becoming more institutional. You're giving LPs more confidence. You're giving them more information that they're going to need to run through their diligence processes. And so the second version, moving to the third version is almost like you probably have it at the end of your fundraising process, 2 years later, let's say. And I wouldn't start from scratch at the next fund, right? Think of it as an iterative process again, where, that first fund where you're building the data room, you start Fund 2 at a much stronger base. And so the information you're disclosing, the information that, as we mentioned earlier, you're kind of organizing becomes part of, how you run your firm and the things you need to create because they're eventually going to end up in your data room to support your next fundraise.
I often see people, what I would say, make a mistake where they'll rush to try to build things where they might see in a much larger later stage firm's data room. They want to build it for themselves super early on. And the classic example is building policies and trying to copy and paste somebody else's policy letters that you then don't follow. And like you end up creating these weird or bad counter signals if you're just not true to yourself and true to who you are as a firm and building what you're building and progress, over time. I think looking to other firms that are later and just copying what somebody else is doing won't necessarily give you the results you want.
I agree with that. And I think it's a really important part of understanding where you are in your fundraising journey and in your firm building journey. And I see that a lot as well, where people are kind of borrowing other pieces of later stage funds, established funds, data rooms, and trying to bring them into the emerging manager world where that's not necessarily best practice. You're aiming to get there, but you don't necessarily need all those materials now. And so I think that brings us up about the LP experience when you're going through a data room, right? And the LP experience for an emerging manager is going to be different than the LP experience for an established manager. For an emerging manager, if you have all these documents that really don't make sense, and they're kind of misrepresented in a way, right? They're borrowed from other funds and they're kind of, poorly adjusted for your own fund, that affects the experience. And so the way we think about LP experience, and Dave, curious to get your thoughts for here, is something that's easy to access, Now you have to be cognizant of the information that's in your data room and who it's going to be shared with. Be wary of data harvesters. But again, like you're fundraising, you're trying to tell people what you're doing. You're trying to, engage with as many people as possible to get them excited about this, product you're selling in the market. But you still want it to be easy to access. If you need to put in an NDA or something in front of the data room, fine. But just note that that does create a friction point. As we mentioned earlier, it should be organized. It should be well labeled, right? I wouldn't over engineer it. Enable downloading. So this is especially true if you're sharing it with larger, more institutional family offices or just, institutional finance firms. They're going to want to download Excel models, your financial models, and be able to adjust assumptions. They're going to want to be able to download the files and, share them across teams, and also save them locally. But I'd say those are kind of the big picture things in terms of an experience.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. As we're making these decisions with GPs now, I have GPs at Fund One that are using tools like Google Drive, right? It's a very easy to access. A lot of people know how to navigate it, and they're having great success because they're easily able to kind of move people through their funnel process. We see a lot of other managers use tools like Dropbox and DocSend that allows them to have analytics and to be able to assess and understand what's happening in their pipeline. But the key there is you actually have to look at the data and do something with it. If you just pay for these tools for the analytics and then never review them, they're not helping you. But I think the tools itself, there's plenty of options that provide a great experience for the LP. I also think some things that are really helpful is a table of contents. Back to the organization, something tactically you can do. Give a table of contents to your LPs, tell them where things are inside your file system, and make it easy for them to go through it. We often will do summarized versions of much longer form documents. So just taking out some of the key terms or key things that are repeated questions that we get asked. And so we can make summary things that are quicker and easier for principals to go through, and then leave the more detailed documents for other advisors that are spending more time going through some of the details. Like there's lots of little things that you can do to structurally set up both the sales process and your engagement with the LP, as well as the actual diligence process that has to happen, depending on whether it's a single high net worth individual or a large institutional team that has like individuals responsible for the different parts of diligence. So you can build these things and have great success with all types of LPs, no matter what stage of venture you're at. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of making it LP friendly, PDFs, Excels, name the documents really clearly. Don't leave draft documents in there, and be very mindful of how you upload things into the public version of it, because a messy, dirty data room just is a bad experience. It gives people doubts, and they think if this is what you're just willing to show, it means you're not really taking the care to think about the LP experience. So just just being nice and neat and tidy makes it a lot easier for all of us.
Great. I think just wrapping up here, couple of points from my end. In my book, How to Raise a Venture Capital Fund, I talk about the pre-marketing phase, which for a lot of people, what does that even mean? And then like the marketing phase, right? When you're actually reaching out to LPs. Like the pre-marketing phase is when we're talking about like exercise versus the game. Like the game is when you're marketing, you're talking to LPs. It's a process, it's a very elaborate sales process, and it takes a long time. You have to be ready for that. So we would encourage kind of a pre-marketing phase when you're getting all these materials ready, right? And that probably is a smaller group of people where you actually are doing external outreach, but it's not the full-on marketing sales process yet. So think of it as like, keeping it simple, breaking it into kind of this pre-marketing. Be ready to have your, version 2, version 3 data room as close as possible before you go out. Because what you don't want to do necessarily, even though if you start with the prospecting with an initial data room, very simple pitch deck and track record, it's going to get overwhelming very quickly, especially if you're reaching out to a lot of people. And that means like they're going to be asking for a lot of things, and everything's going to become a fire drill. And that's going to make you look unprofessional if you don't have those materials kind of ready to go up front, before you really start your robust outreach. So again, try to have as much as possible. Again, it doesn't need to be final, but try to make it final. Try to have as much possible built during that pre-marketing phase. Again, with the understanding that it's going to be iterated on, over the course of your whole fundraising cycle.
Yeah, and I would like to add, on the operator side, for those of us building a lot of the artifacts and chasing down some of the details here. This is practice. This is a great opportunity. As you said, exercise. This is a great way for us to find the red flags before the LPs do. Because it's really embarrassing when an LP asks you for something that's pretty standard, and then you go and look for it and you realize that actually you're in violation. A classic case would be like your business registration. You don't want an LP to find out that with a quick Google search that like you forgot to pay your Delaware tax. And so if you use building your data room as a way to run diligence on yourself to make sure you're seeing what LPs will see of you, you'll find a lot of these little red flags before they do and make your experience much better for you and for your LPs.
Well, let's transition to today's Did You See? Dave.
Yeah, something that caught my eye, and it's going to be a bigger and bigger focus for us at Signal. Recently, I saw on LinkedIn, Peter Walker dropped a post about Claude and MCP connection that Carta has built so that you can now use Claude Chatbot, if it's configured correctly, to start querying your Carta data. Now, I know a lot of people probably aren't rushing right out the door to connect their Claude bot directly to Carta to have it send LP letters out. But I think what it does show is the progression and where we are going with the technology and where GPs and LPs expectations should be in the next couple of years. It should be much easier for GPs and LPs to query their data. It should be as simple as a text message. And right now we're spending a lot of time at Signal thinking through how we would do that and deliver it as the CFO. We own the data. We understand the workflows. We can help build the dashboards. How can we help bring this capability of instant understanding of our data to GPs and LPs? So I think that was a good indicator of where we're going, and there's a lot more to come.
Yeah, there's a lot of firms we work with that just have treasure troves of data, and they want that to be siloed and kind of built for their firm. And we've been spending a lot of time kind of co-building with firms, helping them kind of keep it, idiosyncratic and siloed, which I think
And secure.
and secure, which I think the market is kind of moving in that direction. So super interesting to see some of the top service providers here start to catch on and kind of move forward with this.
Great. We'll see you out there. Thanks so much, Winter. Talk to you soon, man.
All right, see you next week.